Welcome to the Virtual Memories Show. I'm your host, Gil Roth, and we're here to preserve and promote culture in this benighted age, one weekly conversation at a time. You can subscribe to the Virtual Memories Show through iTunes or by plugging our RSS feed into your favorite podcatcher. You can find the RSS feed on our websites, vmspod.com or chimeraobscura.com/VM. We're also on Twitter and Instagram at VMSPod, at virtualmemoriespodcast.tumblr.com, and on Spotify, YouTube, and TuneIn.com by searching for Virtual Memories Show. And visit patreon.com/VMSPod or paypal.me/VMSPod to make a one-time or recurring donation and help me continue to produce smart conversation about books, art, comics, and culture every week at the Virtual Memories Show. I'm doing okay. A little down this week for reasons I can't ascertain, but nothing that feels irreparably wrong. So don't worry about me. I'll get by. In fact, the stories and poems for the next ish of my zine, Haiku for Business Travelers, they're starting to gel in my mind. So I just need to sit down and really get to writing, because I'm hoping to put out a new one around Thanksgiving, which means I got about 3 months to commit some crimes against letters. The zine is free, so there's a whole bunch of people on my distribution list, but you can get on that by just sending me an email or dropping me a note. Anyway, let's get to this week's show. My guest this time around is Betsy Bonner, author of the amazing new memoir, The Book of Atlantis Black, published by Tin House. Atlantis Black is Betsy's younger sister, Nancy, and the book begins with the 2008 discovery of Nancy's dead body in a Tijuana hotel room. And from there, Betsy explores their troubled childhoods, the lives they each began to carve out for themselves, and her sister's descent into addiction and potential criminal activity, because she was sort of on the run from a DEA charge at the time she was found OD'd in Tijuana. But when we return to the body in Mexico, the facts grow more murky, and questions arise as to what actually happened in the hotel room and whether the body is truly that of Betsy's sister, Nancy, who became Atlantis. And her detective work leads her and the reader past certainty into speculation that can only become a hall of mirrors, and you run up into something that can lead to madness. And given her family's history of mental health issues, which we talk about during the show, it's the Book of Atlantis Black is not closure, as Betsy talks about, but to me it is a way that she manages to get past what the uncertainty of her sister's life and death were. Now, as she says during our conversation, Betsy thought she was writing a grief memoir, but because of the circumstances, it does keep creeping into true crime territory. And the Book of Atlantis Black, it's a really good, concise portrait of just how far addiction can take us from ourselves and the ones we love. And maybe I'm projecting, but it also shows how the compulsion to make art — Atlantis was a singer-songwriter, I should have mentioned that earlier — how that compulsion to make art isn't necessarily the path to redemption. That is, it can fuel what destroys us, if you get my meaning, which makes the book an even greater accomplishment. Anyway, I hate to use enjoyed about a book of such harrowing personal experience, but the Book of Atlantis Black is a fantastic memoir, and Betsy does a tremendous job of conveying her sister's descent without putting herself in some narrative position of privilege or judgment. If anything, and it's a notion we get into, you can see some of the switches on the tracks where her own life could have gone into pretty perilous territory. So what I'm saying is, go read The Book of Atlantis Black. It's published by Tin House, came out a month or so ago, available everywhere. Now, as caveats go, the audio is fine. When Betsy mentions David a bunch of times, she's referring to our past podcast and great author, David Gates, who mentioned Betsy's book to me when I was checking in on him a few weeks ago to see how he's holding up during the pandemic, because I am secretly a Jewish mother and worry about all of you. Now, when she talks about Gretchen, put that in air quotes, because Gretchen is a pseudonymous figure in the Book of Atlantis Black. She is someone who did a lot of terrible, manipulative stuff before and after Atlantis's death. I don't want to talk too much more about that stuff. It's really a good book, and only about 240 pages. I read it in a day because I'm that sort of guy. Anyway, the other caveat is I do a lot of gabbing in this episode, but Betsy did ask some questions of me, so, I'm excused, right? Now, here's Betsy's bio. Betsy Bonner is the author of The Book of Atlantis Black, a memoir published by Tin House, and of Round Lake, a poetry collection published by Four Way Books. She is a former director of the 92nd Street Y Unterberg Poetry Center, where she now teaches creative writing. She is a fellow of the MacDowell Colony and the T.S. Eliot House. She grew up in Chadds Ford, Pennsylvania, and lives in southwestern Vermont. And now, the Virtual Memories conversation with Betsy Bonner. When did you feel ready to write this book? And it's a two-part question that goes in a completely different direction. How did it change for you over the process of writing it?
I started writing it in 2012, and I gathered all of the information I needed by the end of 2015. So I felt ready in 2012, but I didn't have all of the story. And of course, it's unresolved. So I would have waited. For as long as it would take, but I felt ready enough to send it to agents, editors. Yeah, probably by 2013, I was sending out drafts, and people were encouraging, but there was, it wasn't finished. So it took 7 years to write the book.
Mm-hmm. And how did you change over the process of it?
Well, for one
Which I know
thing,
was diving into the heavy shit early on, but
yeah. Well, I mean, for one thing, I moved out of Brooklyn when I was finished. I was writing it for 3 years in Brooklyn. I met David, my partner, and I realized I didn't need to live in New York City anymore. I didn't have a regular job. I'm a teacher, and at that time, I really had to take all that time off in order to do this. How did I change? Most people write, so many more books are written than are ever published. The response has been overwhelmingly positive. Other people's stories, Gil, that's what I'm receiving back from this. Everyone from my sister's days in Pennsylvania to our days together in New York City and San Francisco. It's just this, the connectivity is amazing. But it's, someone asked me the other day, was there any closure? No, there's no such thing, but there are new relationships. So that's how I've changed. I've created, and nourished new relationships, so outside of my family ones.
As those stories from people from your shared past or from her past start filtering in, are there aspects of that you would want to go back into the book with, or are they more coloring who Atlantis was and not necessarily related to her?
Oh, yeah. You know what I actually mean is other people's stories that have nothing to do with her. So they either knew
That's
me.
what I was wondering, because I didn't know how many people also have somebody who went through your sister's fate and everything else. Oh gosh, that's amazing.
I mean, whatever it was, it is unknowable, as they say. No, it's people coming to me, reading what they want to read into the book, so a friend from 8th grade saying her ex-husband, had serious addiction problems, people who had, siblings overdose, mothers who committed suicide, and all these different, tragedies. Yeah, they're in the book, but as the book says, we don't know. we weren't there.
Yeah.
We don't know. And the darkness really around my sisters leaving the country, which I thought of as suicide for years. I really did think of it as suicide. And then in writing the book and going through the documents and remembering, I realized, well, that's the story we told, but it never felt true.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it felt true on.
Yeah.
It's like, what is suicide? She definitely wanted to die many times in her life. And then she found someone who could help her do that. That's how I think of it.
Yeah. Do you feel like a survivor?
I guess so. I mean, it's an interesting question. I feel like I was reading something about how we're not supposed to call rape victims survivors anymore, or no, we're not supposed to call them victims. I don't know. I think of myself as living in the world. Do you think of yourself as a survivor? Am I allowed to turn the questions on to you sometimes?
Oh, I always tell people this is a conversation.
Good.
Nobody knows what that means generally, but to me, when I get to just start pontificating about my own life, it's that much more entertaining and that much more tedious for the listener. So yeah, it's
not at all. I'm fascinated. I mean, I want to hear other people's stories. We're all survivors right now during the coronavirus. We are survivors on some level since we're here.
Yeah. But in your case, the family upbringing you depict in the book, the relationship you had with your sister, the unknowability of her death, there's a different sense of surviving than my old man had a shitty midlife crisis back in the 70s and left our family, which sucked in ways that it took me decades to process, but didn't have the physical ramifications or the I like to think less trauma / PTSD related issues that from your again depiction of your upbringing and family life would seem to be kind of heavy, would seem to be things you need, to work through.
Yeah, it's interesting to me. I was in psychotherapy when the shit was hitting the fan with my sister, and I stayed in that therapy up until I was writing the memoir. And once I started writing the memoir, I want to be careful, and emphasize that, it's crafted, it's not intended to be psychotherapy for other people. But I think for a lot of memoir writers, yeah, I'm not sure what the direct relationship is, but it's sort of how I think of if I had had a baby, I wouldn't have written the book. If I'd stayed in psychotherapy, I wouldn't have written, there's just a connection there. In terms of getting the first draft down. And after that, it did bring me joy. It brought me joy to go in and move the pages around. David, as I mentioned in the acknowledgments, was hugely instrumental in all of it. I met him really right when I was talking to Gretchen. It was sort of magical. I was feeling traumatized by that, in 2015. And there was David at book court sitting next to me. And I won't embarrass him because I embarrass him all the time. But it's one way he and I connected very deeply.
Was this the Lee Clay Jackson reading at book court?
No, this was.
Oh, right. Okay, because that would have been a neat way for us to have connected without realizing we were connected. Well, yeah, because I got introduced to Lee up at Bennington, and Nitro Mountain knocked my socks off. Yeah. Lee has refused to come on the show for the same reason you were talking about before we started. He thinks I would be too smart for him, which always pissed me off because there's no way to say, no, don't worry, I'm dumb, without insulting the game.
Lee Clay Johnson is a genius. And now, are you thinking of the Greenlight bookstore reading?
That's the place. That's right. Yeah,
we were all there then, Gil. I was there for that, for sure. David and Lee talking. Yeah. So you and I have been in the same room. Lee's a genius. And just to hear his voice, I mean, he's brilliant. He's my colleague also. I hired him. I gave him the job he has now. So he likes me.
Oh. But David helped in terms of the helping craft, or you're starting to talk about the crafting of the memoir.
Yeah.
And working on it afterwards.
All of it. I mean, I had through part 2, before 2015. And then in June 2015, I was getting more information and it was freaking me out. I mean, it was disturbing information. Some of the information seemed like lies, but then I remember David using a sexist term. He's like, you've got to be girl detective. I'm like, what are you talking about? But of course, I was girl detective, who I guess is an actual character, right? And really, I just mean I think because of his experience as a teacher, he has heard it all before. He's read it all before. Nothing scares him, really. He's had stalkers, he understood. So that made all the difference. Mm-hmm. I have steadfast friends, but it was complicated to try to explain why I would sometimes be very, sort of frightened, maybe borderline paranoid, but really I think I was, protecting myself and being careful.
Did you have concerns about the ethics of the book? I know there's the character of Gretchen, the person of Gretchen, who you mentioned, has had her name changed for the sake of, complexity, I guess, as you describe it. But were there issues you had to work through along those ethical lines?
Well, yeah. Since my sister left me that voicemail where she was lying, with a figurative gun to her head, kind of wanting me really not to go there, not to, not to really investigate Gretchen. Yes, she's the only one with a pseudonym. And then the name she used with my sister was not her real name either. So I had to, this is my view. There's a lot that I don't know about Gretchen. I know that she was manipulative. I found her to be very sinister. There was a case you might have read about in Boston, this young woman who befriended this mentally ill boyfriend and encouraged him to kill himself. And, her text messages, do it. And anyway, at some point she finally, was charged with that. And David and I agree that that's the kind of thing, that happened really with both my sister and my mother. But it's impossible to prove. It's impossible to know short of a confession. And ultimately, after I was done drafting everything that I wanted to get down on paper, it just became so much more about bringing my sister to life as a character. You know, I mean, so many people, and now during the pandemic, people are losing their loved ones where no one's there, no one's able to be there, you know, and I think creating her for the page, that did give me, it gave me some comfort, you know, I mean, it thrilled me really to do that. But the other parts were not, were not thrilling.
Yeah. Yeah. I guess in that respect, just the visiting and revisiting, was it different revisiting it for the sake of the memoir as opposed to, you know, the way you would be playing out what she went through prior to actually writing? Again, not in a closure sense, but how different was it looking at it in terms of, we'll say, art, as opposed to your day-to-day experience of trying to deal with that unknowingness?
Yeah, vastly different. Art is what we make during the day in this case. I did have nightmares after my mother died, especially. And once I had this project, which could consume me, as you know, I mean, these book projects completely consume a person. I couldn't be as present. You know, there were things I wanted to do with people. My good friends understood she's working on a book and she loves us, you know, good friends understood that. But yeah, the isolation was hard. And then certainly once I had an agent who wanted to represent it, that helped. But really finding the editor, finding Maisie Cochran at Tin House was, you know, one of the best days of my life.
Mm-hmm. Have there been issues with Gretchen now that the book is out?
I don't think so. There are.
You would know. I mean, have you?
I think I would know. I also, with my sister's bandmate, guitarist Tim Adams, who is a lovely human being, a gifted songwriter, he has been archiving her music and he's been sort of managing Facebook messages on a page that I wrote about, you know, that had been a memorial page, had been usurped, all this crap. But he has it now and he fields people. There was one person who was ranting and I thought that sounds a lot like her, but you know, I don't listen to it and I don't have any interest in it. I don't know. David said he didn't think she had the attention span to read a book. I think that's true. But of course, there's an audio book. So who knows? But I haven't heard from her directly. And I feel it was my right to write this book. You know, she wants to, if she's alive and she wants to tell a different story, good luck.
Yeah. What's been the experience of getting Atlantis's music released or re-released?
It's really fun. It's because there were songs that to my ear that were excellent. Then she really kind of had 4 different periods. There were the demos in Pennsylvania, which everyone thought had promise. This EP that she put out herself, called In My Bed. And then this unfinished album that we are finishing and that takes on several meanings in the book. That one that's called More Than Opium. And then there are these songs that I just wouldn't want to put out until after all of that, where they're just, can I curse on it? Just dark as fuck.
I always tell people, don't worry, nobody's listening, so it's okay.
Yay. And you know, it's for some people, I mean, I listened to dark as fuck music all God through my teenage years, and 20s. But, you know, I would want her to be known for the really great stuff first and then, you know, do that. So it's fun hearing from Steve Lyon, that producer who did understand her sensibility So really we just have these master recordings, and then he's been mixing them. And I love them. David is the one who said, competent, not embarrassing with the early stuff. He's a total music snob, and his sensibility is completely different. Atlantis's music, isn't for him, you know? Yeah. But anyway, that's been joyful rather than sending me into a pit of despair. Some of the later songs that there's one that I mentioned that I just found unlistenable in the book. And there's a whole creepiness, there's a creepiness around what happened with that videotape. Why was it called her unfinished second album? Like sort of mocking her, this inner, like that kind of shit. And that's what Gretchen was doing. She was, marring her, everything that was important to Atlantis.
Yeah, it's one of the challenging aspects of the book is how you have to deal with either unreliable documents, and we'll just say a Tijuana autopsy report is not going to be the most thorough document in general, but also the revision of the past, the way Gretchen or someone else is erasing or changing things as as the past gets further and further back, we start seeing things that have been changed, and you have to figure out what's accurate, inaccurate, and what the motive is for changing some of this stuff.
Yes.
Yeah, it's to me, as a big fan of Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind, a really interesting concept for understanding a memoir in which, we all have the unreliable narrator, but, when the things that we're supposed to rely on don't add up, it's, it makes for a really good book. As far as I'm concerned.
I love that you brought up Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind in this talk. I should watch that again very soon. I love that. And, in this day and age, it seems like, of course, history has been rewritten all of our lives, right? It's, but yeah, these things, these so-called documents, again, since my sister was interested in forgery, very interested, a pretty skilled practitioner of it, that side of her frightened me. And, I understand it as her creating an alter ego, wanting to be undetected, being sort of thrilled by being undetected or unfindable, hidden. I understand that as a concept, but my sister's, there were other email accounts. There are things that, of course, I can't put everything in the book, but there seemed to be several of her. And you're right with the unreliability even of, well, who's writing this email? Like this, her password is known to everyone. And, so really there's the digital record, right? Which could be penned by anyone. And on that level, I think that my own memories here on the virtual memories show, my own memories take precedence over these documents, some of which were definitely forged, a name change form, probably that toxicology report. One of the Tijuana reports had an insignia that, if translated, it would have said attorney general instead of attorney general. I mean, it was, bad shit. And yet, the DEA report was sent to Mr. Bonner, a year before I finally got it. And it's all documentation. It's none of it can really be relied on. So choosing which ones to kind of highlight in the book. And I hope that I didn't, I hope it doesn't seem to the reader that I'm being tricky with that. It's really, this is how we experienced it in my family. And then this is what I uncovered. And there's more to uncover. I I would be surprised if anything, if I ever had to write an afterword, I would happily do it. But I don't think that's going to happen. I would be surprised.
That's a bit like when we were talking about structuring this. I mean, there's a degree to which you have to create a mystery or a thriller in the process. Not that that's, not that that's the goal, but that the nature of this is what we thought happened and this is why those thoughts started to unravel. It's something that requires a degree of craft. I guess along those lines, a question is, what were your literary influences in terms of memoir for something like this? Or were they extra memoir in terms of the sort of books and authors who were guiding you? Yeah,
I mentioned to you in my email that Walter Kern's Blood Will Out was huge for me. I loved, he'd been duped and he's so funny. And I'm jealous that you've been able to have conversations with him. What I've heard about him is from my friend Pat Towers. We were sitting on her screened-in porch where Walter, he would just stay up all night and talk. So I don't know how you ever managed to have a podcast length conversation with him. But anyway, Blood Will Out, I loved. There was a thriller that I read right around when I realized I was writing memoir, and it's called Sister by Rosamund Lupton. I saw it reviewed in the Times, and it's a novel, it's a thriller. But with some of those debut fiction, you can see the autobiographical, core of it. And that has correspondence between two sisters. The sister, well, I'm not going to spoil the plot. It's a thriller. It's great. And then I did read just all the memoirs I could get my hands on. I read a lot of grief memoirs. And at first I assumed that's what mine would be. And then I realized there was too much possibility for the mystery thriller style. A Misery by Stephen King is another one. I read all sorts of, I thought that was brilliant, absolutely brilliant. So yeah, I read what was out there, but Walter's was the closest to anything that I wanted to do.
There's actually a double connection between those books and us. Your book, you mentioned Jesse Scheidlauer in the acknowledgments. I met Jesse for lunch once and was carrying Blood Will Out because I was reading it in prep for Walter Kern. And Jesse says, I was friends with Clark Rockefeller, right? Who is the impersonator who duped Kern the whole time. And I said, no, but that makes all the sense in the world. So he filled me in on his story about Clark and how Clark, they were friends through Clark's wife, and Clark cut Jesse off for no reason Jesse could figure out, just stopped talking to him, wouldn't return emails, calls, etc. Only after the whole scandal breaks and it turns out he was an imposter, potentially a murderer, etc., does Jesse realize he must have said something and he must have left a clue by accident and was afraid I was going to ask him about it or, start unraveling his whole false identity. And so he just zeroed me out. And he said I was crushed at the time. Now, of course, he was happy to not be in the company of an imposter and murderer. But, so yeah, Jesse connects to my books that are somehow true life murder or death stories. So we got that going for us.
Jesse is brilliant. And I will ask him about that. I didn't know that. Yeah. Ooh, I'm glad that Jesse's with us.
There is a whole separate story that I'll tell you off mic about that also that I find funny, but is incredibly convoluted and strange. But the thing I wanted to ask, though, tell me about your relationship with social media. Just when we first got pitched when David first mentioned the book, I was like, let me look her up. Not a whole lot out there. And then once I read the book, I thought, were there traces that you have subsequently sort of gotten rid of? Or are you just one of those people who, Twitter, don't need it, and, Facebook is there for family members or the like.
Yeah, so Facebook I joined on my way to Greece, and that was 2007, and it was still pretty new. And I know in the book I mentioned that I invited my sister to join Facebook. I didn't use it a lot, and after her page was usurped, I asked, whoever the Facebook gods are, I asked them to take it down, and they did. I don't know if anyone else had flagged it, but for my own, I remember signing up for Instagram, signing up for Twitter, but I think it's a little too crazy making for me. I think even the fact that social media is publishing, that they own all your photographs, they own what you say. I love though being able to post, I'll post this on my own Facebook page. I try to make it so others aren't posting on my wall. That would freak me out a little too much. I used to have that all the time. If that's what you're asking, so my own personal relationship to social media, I don't want to be tweeting. I do want to get the news right away, and I mostly read news on the internet. But I think it's a combination of writing practice, reading practice, and thinking I would get a little too sucked into it.
Which is entirely appropriate and accurate. It's just that most of us give in and let ourselves be sucked in. It's only on weekends lately I've started cutting off Twitter and things like that for like 12 hours at a time, and just, with all the reading I do for the show, and the there's an ongoing joke about the whole Martin Amis thing, who I was trying to get for my 400th episode, who confirmed, but because of his publication date now has to fall to the 402nd episode. So I've got 1,200 pages of Amis's stuff to prep with for a single hour of conversation. But this is the crazy shit that I do to myself.
Oh, it's wonderful. It's so wonderful. And these days, now that we're Zooming and everything, to be able to listen. I am an example of someone who's gotten more into podcasts during the pandemic. It's, just cut down on that screen time. And it's a similar, it's a similar pleasure to reading. It is to me.
Yeah. Now, within the book, sticking with the Facebook topic, the decision to incorporate primary material like Atlantis's Facebook updates, as well as the post-death updates that were made once her page got lifted. What went into the mindset with that, with incorporating that into the narrative itself, and reflecting on who we are, who we make ourselves look like on social media versus what it might tell us about who the person really was in that moment. Yeah.
So when Atlantis sent me what she called her memoir pages, documenting her spiral into drugs and alcohol and her nervous breakdown. And I thought, I didn't, I know you have a lot of mental health issues, but I didn't think that you'd had a nervous breakdown. And it was as if with the Facebook posts, she was, and again, I say perhaps with someone else, it is impossible to know. She was mythologizing this really frightening disappearance. So it's to use that in the book. And it was always tricky. How are we going to, how and where are we going to interrupt, the larger story, the prose, how much of her voice should I include? People in reviews have said, these nonsensical or unintelligible posts, but some readers do see a kind of intelligence or a kind of logic to that story. So it's right. People with status updates, we're always self-mythologizing, and inventing another story about ourselves. And I guess also, since I knew I wanted to include her own voice from that interview. So it was sort of a third, I consider the Facebook, it's different from the emails, right? Which sometimes could be trusted, but then email is not safe. So nothing, it's sort of the story she wanted to tell, that she wanted to leave behind, and then putting that up against reality as I experienced it.
That is the one thing I wanted to complain about with the book. The sections from the interview in San Diego are on the pages are black, and the font is too thin for my almost 50-year-old eyes. So that was the only thing I had. I'm not sure what's there, but other than that, flawless book. I'm really ecstatic about it. But yeah, it was just that odd thing. I was like, it's like reading Chris Ware comics when the font is just too small for middle-aged men like me.
It was a toss-up. I worried that it could be gimmicky, and in the end, I think of that as making it more of an art book. I'm sorry that you had trouble reading it, but that was the design team's idea and decision. There's also Ariana Raines, a sand book. She has this, so she's a poet, if you don't know her work. No, I don't know. And so a sand book, I think it was nominated for a National Book Award, something, but Tin House published that, and it's this, I think you'd like, but no, you're not going to be able to read it. It's
only in after the mornings, once I put my contact lenses in, that's when the problems begin for anything close up. So there are guests who I read for, and I know I have to read them in the morning before I put in my contacts, or at night, yes, after I've taken them out. So again, my life is more complicated than it needs to be. But
I'm extremely myopic also. I know. But you were able to actually read it, right?
Oh yeah, it was fine. It's just that moment of the first time, like, oh, yeah, okay, I'll do this. I'll turn the light on so I can, get the contrast. But I thought those sections in particular were interesting in terms of depicting her in relationship to somebody else and what those disclosures were.
Yeah.
And what it means for you to discover them later. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that when I had that videotape, sort of, I guess we had it, digitized. A trusted friend who's in the film industry digitized it for me so I could have it on a DVD and have backup copies. And it was so dark. The action, and my friend George Nicholas, he was just like, Betsy, I can't, like, it's so, like, physically can't, you can't get any lighter than this. And it's, I chose not to put Gretchen's own voice in there. But yeah, there are, I half wanted to, but then I just let it be Atlantis's. That was, I wouldn't watch it again now. I did the transcription myself.
But you watch it like a detective.
I did.
Did you watch like a detective or like it was your sister?
Fucking Girl Detective. I watched it like Girl Detective. I watched it like a detective much more so than This Is My Sister. She seemed altered, she seemed, she didn't know what day it was. And that's how it begins. And it's fucking, it's disgusting. It's disgusting. It was disgusting to watch. But it was important for the book. Yeah.
What's family mean to you? And I do have the line from the book, which I wrote out. I was committed to loving the people in my family, not because they were easy or even kind, but because they have been given to me. So you can use that as your answer. But, if you have something else, what does family mean? Oh,
yeah. Well, now it's also, and thank you for quoting that line, family. So friends, my family of choice. Absolutely. Friends, writers, readers, students, colleagues, teachers, family, cats. When we have cats, they are members of the family. So yeah, the meaning does change in the book. Early on, it's my immediate family, biological people I was, raised with and by. And I do have, I guess it's true. I do think of my cousin and my aunt. I think of them as family, also people I'm related to by blood. But yeah, I that's just sort of semantics. When I think of family, it's definitely the new relationships that I care as much about. That there is something, with my sister, the literal sharing of blood and genes, however much DNA is true, if it's 50% or how does it work with siblings? It can vary.
You're each getting 50% of the parents. But that can statistically lead to, a lot of significant differences.
Right. No, it's a good question about family. What does it mean to you, Gil?
Oh God. Sorry, allergies. There are, I have, you've only been reading the podcast email for a week or so. Mm-hmm. There are ongoing stories about family and what it means. We had an incredibly tight, we had this nuclear family here in the U.S. Most of my family is not in America. Mm-hmm. He said vaguely, as though there was some great secret behind that. And as it disintegrated when I was a kid, there wasn't a whole lot that replaced it. It's going to be a weird thing to tell you because I never try and presume this, but when I recorded with Kurt Anderson a couple of weeks ago, I was listening to his farewell episode to his Studio 360, where he mentioned one of only 2 or 3 people over the 20 years he hosted the show with whom he became friends through the show. Now, Kurt had a much more active social life, media world in New York, et cetera. So he was having people he was friends with on the show over the years. To me, most of my social life is now people I've met through the podcast. And again, I never assume that any of you are going to remember me the moment, we hit stop recording. But, I've made more friends and close-ish people in my life through this. There are still, friends from childhood and youth, but generally, as far as family goes, I've managed to keep things pretty tight, I guess.
Yeah.
The joke I used to use over the years was that I treat my friends like terrorist cells. So none of them knew each other, and that way none of them could get together and start putting together the whole story. That was my somewhat melodramatic way of framing it. And over the years, I've gotten looser about stuff, largely because I realized there wasn't a whole lot to me underneath for them to put together. So that's also me saying that I'm actually irredeemably shallow, which you won't get from only an hour of conversation. But it's true. But yeah, there's a degree that, there wasn't a whole lot that replaced it. I stayed close with my mother, but
mm-hmm.
Yeah.
It makes perfect sense to me that you are going to connect deeply with people who care about the same things you care about.
Yeah. I just don't want anybody to figure out what I actually care about. But that's either here or there. A question for you is, you were, we'll say, trained. You were a poet before or even during this project. Prose, especially creative nonfiction versus poetry for you? The writing, how does it differ? What did you learn? What carried over from one genre versus the other?
This is one of those sort of, I don't know if it's esoteric. There's something mysterious about this book that I've just published, the Book of Atlantis Black. When I was 7 or 8, I started writing a book, a children's book, and it had 2 sisters, and then I turned them into cousins. So you and I have this in common, Gil, like early fiction efforts. And years went by. I studied poetry in graduate school. I love to read poetry. Poetry for me was typically an up all night process, very different from the daytime memoir writing process. With the story that I'm mentioning from my childhood, I started writing it again in 2006 as I refer to it as my sci-fi novel in this memoir. I refer to that. And it was the same story. And that kind of is how I think of what this memoir became. I do feel that I've been writing it for my entire life, even before the events happened. So in poetry, I was writing the memoir when my first book of poetry got accepted, and that gave me the opportunity to include newer poems. And my sister is a figure in that book. So is my mother. But in a way, it's sort of like I wasn't done with all that, you know? So I mean, it's abundantly clear that this book had to be a memoir. I tried when I was getting rejections, and believe me, I got plenty, in my early efforts. I sort of experimented thinking about transforming it somehow into either a screenplay or a novel. And if you ever see the files in my laptop, you know, it was, oh God. Anyway, it all had to come back to being memoir, nonfiction. There was no chance that it could have been in those other forms. I hope that helps. I mean, poetry is, I feel, my soul. So even, you know, you can take the Catholic out of the girl or the girl. You know, I still think in terms of the word soul sometimes. I'll write poetry again. I would write memoir again. Right now, I'm back to the fiction, experimenting with that. And I feel comfortable and happy doing that. I think it's the biggest challenge I can set myself. And I don't think I'll be any good, especially with some of the company that you and I keep. But I'm going to try. And I love to read novels. So.
Yeah, see, on my side, I'm just so paralyzed by anxiety and yeah, we'll just say fear of rejection that I've managed to put it off for, God, 30 plus years now. So outside of that zine you saw, some of which is actually made up.
It's wonderful. You've got to do, and the thing is, people, thank God, with writing, we do get better. We get better as we get older. Sometimes I think with poetry, there's magic in one's 20s, you know, and then, but it's one thing we don't have to worry about in terms of aging. We are getting smarter, at least for a certain amount of time, right?
So I like to believe, you know. Tell me about, oh, sorry, go on.
No, I was going to say, I have no idea. You tell me.
Oh, I think I'm far smarter now and smart enough not to write. But that's no, I'm kidding. I'm actually getting started on a story I've told verbally over the years that I need to sit down and write. The time I charmed the figurative pants off the Princess of Yugoslavia.
I'm dying to read this.
Oh, what's great is it only came up earlier this year when I was interviewing the porn actress and writer Stoya, and she's Yugoslavian descent or Serbian descent. And I said, oh, when we get together, I'll tell you about the time I charmed the pants off Princess Elizabeth. And I forgot to tell her the story. And then the pandemic hit, and we've spoken once for a check-in episode, but you know, she's got other stuff to deal with. So I thought I really do need to sit down and, you know, me, Princess Elizabeth, and quote, my dear friend Merv Griffin, unquote. That's the title. It'll end up in another zine at some point, but yeah, I've got to sit down and tell some of the oddball stories from, I don't know, you know, my life's not particularly thrilling, I guess. I like to think it's a rather mundane life, but people keep having that reaction that you're having. So
all of our lives are so thrilling. No, it's beautifully done too. Haiku for business travelers.
Which people keep thinking is just going to be haiku. I'm like, no, that's just a funny title, but yeah.
I had it on my nightstand, and I don't know if this will mean anything to you, but the movie Beetlejuice, right? When they have the kind of guidebook for the dead. That's what, anyway, I'm enjoying it, and I would wish you, good luck doing that. I think you should do it, but it's not my business, but I'll read it.
Yeah. Yeah. I'll tell some stories, write some poems, and excerpt some podcasts, because that's my thing.
Writing is hell for perfectionists like us. Writing is hell. Yeah. Who would ever want to do it?
Yeah, it's how do I get around to conveying some of the more oddball stories from my youth? But let me ask, you worked at 92nd Street Y, and you helped organize the literary events and then the readings and such. First question, who do you most regret that you weren't able to wrangle? We mentioned Sir Tom Stoppard in an email earlier, but was there one were you in that level of trying to organize them, and was there someone you just couldn't get who it killed you weren't able to bring in?
Yeah, we all wanted Bob Dylan. We did. We wanted him to come visit. And I ran the writing program too. That was an important part of it. I did that for 5 years, and then for the 6th year when I was in Greece, I consulted, and now I teach there, which is an absolute joy. We did it on Zoom this summer. I had a group of memoir writing students, and that was my first one there doing memoir. I've been doing poetry seminars before that. Finally, I'm qualified, right? But it's technically where I very first met David. We just have no memory of it. He was introducing Mary Gateskill. And it was recorded, I'm sure. Edna O'Brien was there. But I have to say, Gil, I feel like I met everyone during that time. Anyone who came through New York,
That leads to the question I hit everybody with: freakouts or meltdowns over literary figures. Like, did you have people you were just completely, like, you plotzed around, like, holy shit, I can't believe I'm talking to, again, Bob Dylan would have freaked all of us out. But
well, Stephen Merritt of the Magnetic Field, Stephen Merritt is a singer-songwriter, and I just think of him as a poet, really. And I was listening to his music all through my 20s, and that was a cool thing to do, to have him come and perform music too. He talked to Rick Moody. And then after I left, Bernard Schwartz, who now runs the Y, my good friend, whom I hire very well. He had Roseanne Cash. So some of that stuff when, sort of crossover genres. Margaret Atwood, my mother came for that, and my sister came for that event with E.L. Doctorow. My mother came to some others. And that's, I actually do think of the Y as my house. When I go back, the same security guards are there, the same people working the ticket booth. It's really cool. So I started working there in 2002. And I still work there. So that's some longevity.
Yeah, it's I quit my 20-year job back in 2014 before starting this absolutely bizarre thing that I do now. So
I'm so curious about the pharmaceuticals. What? And my sister was a pharmacist. Ha ha. Maybe off mic we can talk about that.
Oh yeah, I'll fill you in on all sorts of crazy stories. Again, not presuming we have a friendship or relationship, but I figure you seem curious enough about the weird things I've fallen into over the course of my life. So.
I think we have some similar tastes. So yeah, I know that you've continued these friendships with guests, and it's a huge honor to talk to you at all.
Jeez. Yeah, I'd say I'm blushing, but it's just a lack of air conditioning while I keep the noise down in here. Tell me about pandemic life. You mentioned teaching via Zoom.
Yeah.
How has your pandemic experience been?
I have nothing to complain about, so let's just get that out there.
Complaining is what separates us from the animals. We can always complain. So,
well, in 2018, I turned down running the writing program I was running for the Writers Foundry. And I bought this house, this 1700s farmhouse. It's from the 1790s with David. And this is the first, it's my first house. It's my first, living with a partner. We didn't expect to be living together full time. We were both going down to Brooklyn to teach. And pandemic life has meant, as for a lot of people, organizing how to give each other space. Since we're both writers, we take a lot of time in the morning, just silently, in different parts of the house. But it's a retreat. It's a rural, rustic retreat. And so on that, I feel incredibly lucky that we had this kind of space. But then it's been, I wondered, can I teach on Zoom? Am I going to be able to connect? So much of what I've done with teaching, I feel like being in the room with students, seeing their eyes, for God's sake, and it turns out we can do it. We can teach on Zoom. It's not as good, but it's one thing that has happened is people, and with the readings too, there was someone in Seattle, at a bookstore event, I guess that was with Madison Street Books in Chicago. I mean, there's no good in this pandemic, Gil. The pandemic is hell. The pandemic is awful. And it's terrifying. And since my partner's older, I'm additionally careful. I miss seeing human beings. I do wish that you and I, again, were doing this in person. But weirdly, it hasn't been vastly different from how we would have been in the summer, but it's only because of this house. I lived in New York City for years and years and years. What about for you? I mean, you said you went running this morning.
Oh, that's the only interaction I have is with this 70-year-old guy who is my running partner.
Yeah.
We're part of a bigger running group, but he doesn't trust some of the participants, not trust, but just, isn't secure with that. So for the first time, he actually wanted to come to my house to run, and we ended up doing this insane 14-mile thing. But otherwise, I see nobody. It's me and my wife and my dog. And, I do this, which is fine. But, as you were talking about, it's the reading of the other person when you're in person. And this is great, but it's not as great as it could be.
Yeah.
I'm thankful that I think my wife is also thankful I'm not driving. I realized through this, I was doing a lot of time on the road on weekends for this. And it's like, oh yeah, I just sit downstairs now for an hour or so and we talk and it's fine. All that time spent driving to New York, sitting on subways, etc., is all gone. There are things you miss about that, of course.
Yeah.
But yeah, sometimes it's just the wanting to go somewhere. And because I've spent my entire life here in New Jersey, pretty much just going to a mall and walking around would be nice, but it's just not going to happen.
No.
A few weeks ago, I had the thought of, I'd love to just go to Newark, get on the Acela, go down to Washington, walk around for a little while and come back, which is what I would do for my day job.
Yeah.
Do that, go lobbying and then, come back home. Just to see that landscape go by or something, things like that. The 2 or 3 hours I would spend, headed down there and just looking out and seeing, certain landmarks and being surprised by other things and writing haiku for business travelers in those moments, has all gone. And my lobbyists down there are like, don't expect anything next year. We're still thinking Congress is not going to be happy about having tons of people come wandering in and out of the halls. So we're going to be doing everything by telecon. It's that. The flip side is I refer to it as discovering my inner cartoonist because of all the cartoonists I record with. They are pretty much shut-ins and shut off visual contact. And I realized, maybe I missed out on that occupation because it turns out I can handle this, perfectly fine.
Oh my God. I hear you about the train travel. David and I, there were times when we were wanting to be here, in this farmhouse so much that we would drive the 5 hours that usually became 6 hours to Brooklyn to teach our workshops. And then we would stay the night in the city. But the train, I've never visited Montreal. I was hoping to do that. And the fact that
did you watch The Americans?
I watched
TV
the
show,
beginning of it. I watched like the first couple.
Watch the whole thing because the train to Montreal becomes a significant thing.
Oh, I didn't know that.
I won't tell you anything else.
Awesome. No, I love a recommendation like that. But like you, on planes and trains, I've always been able to write poetry. I'm knocking on wood that things are going to change, and they have to,
Yeah. It's just, for me, I wasn't a huge traveler, maybe 30 or 40,000 miles flying annually, as opposed to guys I know who are six-figure, or Walter Curran with Up in the Air and all that.
Oh my God.
All my work-related pals were all like, I know we complained about the hotels and the flights and everything else, but Jesus Christ, it would be great to just have to go somewhere for, a day or two and come back just to go through that routine again. But again, it's just too much of a risk or a hazard for us all.
It is. And, the last time I was in New York City, it was for this joyful lunch with Tin House. It was a media luncheon. It was, where were we? It was some famous restaurant on 18th Street. If you said the name, I would know it. And
Keen's, the steakhouse with the Keen's, the steak place with the pipes on the ceiling. Okay,
it was Italian. I feel like maybe Northern Italian. But I don't remember the food. It was just being with people. Chris Beha was there. Rosalie Knecht, who's a Tin House author, writing lesbian detective fiction. She's awesome. So anyway, it's this publication was giving me a social life, and this kind of thing. I mean, this is amazing to me. It's been amazing that people do show up to bookstore events, and they'll show themselves on camera, and like they're walking down the street and they have the mask on the side of their face to ask a question. It's like, anyway, people are reading. I know they're reading. And we are lucky that we love to do that, and that we do have this kind of community. I feel like what do you
miss about New York?
What do I miss about New York? Is that what you asked?
Yeah.
People and architecture. Leaving New York was hard. If I had all the money in the world, I would, of course, have a pied-à-terre there. But when we bought this house, that was going to be it. I do not come from that kind of background, but it was my home. I lived in, I don't even know, probably 12 different apartments, different neighborhoods. I would move to do a different job, and I was light on my feet. I miss walking around Carroll Gardens, which is the last neighborhood I really lived in. I also lived in Clinton Hill, to be able to walk to work for the Writers Foundry. But that, the quality of life that I could afford there, I don't miss. So my friends who are living there in this pandemic, it's, someone was posting on Facebook, there are people playing music again outside. But yeah, I miss, 2-hour lunches, before a workshop kind of thing. What about you?
Oh, this.
Yeah.
This is the thing I miss most. My wife nailed it pretty early on when I would ask people, what they wanted to do again once this is all done. And she's like, you just want to sit across a table from someone and do an interview. I'm like, yeah, I just want to be able to do that. I mean, wherever you want to eat and all the other stuff and the bookstores to visit. But yeah, just to make this sort of conversation and connection, that's the thing I will be dying to get back to. I even thought about it with a guest in New York State, Margot Mifflin. We recorded a little while ago. It was about half an hour from me, and we thought we could meet in person outside with like a plexiglass thing, but we started creating so many things. It's like, fuck it, let's just do a Zencaster and do a remote session. But
it's the right decision. I mean, I saw, I did a couple of walking, masked outdoor walking dates with friends in Hudson, New York, which is another place I've lived. Do you know Hudson? Do you go there?
No, I don't.
Yeah, there are a lot of writers in that area. And maybe off mic I feel like, how is it possible you're having trouble finding your 400th celebratory?
Oh, it's not trouble. It's the finding somebody personal pantheon level.
Yeah.
That's what I like to do for the 400th. So there's a ton of guests I could slot in there, and I probably will end up using somebody, but finding the Fran Lebowitz or the Richard Price or somebody like that, that I could, being able to get them to commit. Or trust me, there is a spreadsheet of all these, the Mount Rushmores, the regular people. There's a whole lot of that
I do
stuff.
trust you. 400, that is huge. That is impressive.
That doesn't include the 60 daily episodes I did during the pandemic, where I would just start doing recordings with past guests to find out how they were holding up.
Yeah, and I listened to
that's actually a question, because my question about that is, do you recognize yourself from 5 or 6 months ago? Because there are things that I'm looking back, I'm like, how the fuck did I do a daily show and get up in the morning, write my journal, post a show, and, do everything else? I don't understand what I was able to do in April of this year. Like, I don't feel like the same human being. And I don't know if other people are experiencing that sense of dislocation, I guess.
Yeah. I mean, I do feel bewildered. Though, the masks are not terrifying anymore. We obey all of the rules, and we're, like I said, we're very careful, but it was,
Sure.
It was so depressing. It was terrifying and depressing right in the beginning. And that I'm very glad to see all of the people in Vermont wearing their masks. The person I think that's hard to remember is the person who had a full-time job, sort of, and even more than that, it was a full-time faculty job plus program direction. So really that person, before my life changed like that, yeah, I'll think about what you asked, and if I have another answer, I'll tell you.
Yeah.
But it's
because it's one thing of who we were before all this, but who we were in the early days of this. Like, I gave myself running challenges in the first few months of this. I was just getting back to running after an injury. I had to lay off again for a month recently. Because of that 1 month layoff, I can't even conceive of who I was in like June, when I thought, yeah, I can run these 3 lakes, 13 miles under 2 hours and get home.
Oh my God.
It doesn't make any sense to me. And I did it today and almost died, but it's just, there's this discontinuity, I guess, which gets us back to the book in that sense of who people are and who we think they are, and whether the people closest to you can be, this is what I was getting at with the question of you as a survivor. Your father exhibited behavior that was never diagnosed, but conceivably could have been, I don't know.
Could have been anything.
I don't want to say mental health. I don't want to say it was part of the tumor that was an issue, but exhibited violent behavior.
Yeah.
Your mother and your sister both significant mental health issues along those lines. Do you... Again, I'm sure you look at yourself and try and gauge, am I falling into any of those patterns? But, is there that sense of, I'm the one who got away? I'm the one who managed to keep it together?
Yeah, so my mother had bipolar disorder.
Yeah.
And I don't believe that my sister was ever properly diagnosed. Jeannie Vanasco, the memoirist, she has bipolar disorder, and she sees in Atlantis's behavior, she identifies that it's possible, I never wanted to have a blood test or anything like that.
Sure.
How are my lithium levels? But because I've never tried to kill myself, knock on wood, that's one indication.
Well, after this conversation.
Anyway, but because it was very real in our family. My mother attempted suicide when we were very young. My sister attempted it at least 3 times that I knew about. I kind of think with my father, he certainly was never diagnosed with anything. He was abused physically, and in the Irish Catholic families that we knew in our church, people, that was sort of normal. But he was beaten by his mother, and he never told me that, but my mother told me that about him. And I don't know, but he had never, other than being, a survivor of child abuse himself, he didn't really encounter mental illness like my mother's, to the best of my knowledge. But really, the way I saw it was he flew into rages, not an alcoholic, though could have been a secret alcoholic. I don't know. I didn't know how to look for that in childhood. But yeah, I've certainly had depression and anxiety, and very much around these losses. But I do think I escaped something, and I think it would have shown itself, during those years after my mother's death, and it didn't. And I worry sometimes about, so right now I'm 41. My mother, I think, was around this age when she tried to kill herself. No, she was a little younger. And I also kind of hate that anniversary stuff. It's like we measure ourselves. It used to be important to me. It used to be interesting, okay, I've outlived Atlantis, or, okay, like I got this far. And now I don't, it's like, finally I forget what age I am, and I forget, I'm not measuring myself up against them for the most part, but I do, there's plenty to worry about. But there's something, I felt such compassion for them because I could see how desperate they were. And yeah, I mean, depression is something that I monitor, in myself, but I'm not, I haven't been concerned about myself in that way, in the way I was concerned about them.
Yeah. Last question. Do you read more books by living authors or dead ones?
Oh God, probably living right now, though, when I was reading, and, in grad school for poetry, it was so many dead people. I feel like the dead people are the best, but then I'm someone who reads my friends' books. And as I get to know more writers, I love reading books by friends. David, like he'll read some, but he has too many friends. He can't get through most of them. And memoirs can be really quick, so I a lot of the living memoirists, but my mother's copy of Wuthering Heights, that's partly why I have that epigraph. It's for my sister, referring to herself as the other Bronte. But Wuthering Heights is such a magical, melodramatic book. I loved Thomas Hardy growing up, and I still do. David and I were reading Jane Austen, also Thomas Hardy, in the early dark days of the pandemic when we couldn't really go outside because it was winter in Vermont. Yeah. You read more living ones these days, I guess, right? For your show.
I'm stuck. I have to. Yeah. And that's been a question of mine since I really got rolling with this. What would I be reading if I didn't have the show?
Yeah.
Like sometimes when I get ahead, well, I've told the story a few times. Amor Tolls last year turned me on to John le Carré's George Smiley novels. And I had no idea. And I just burned through those over the course of last fall and winter and thought, oh, hey, he's really good. Not as a spy novelist, as a novelist. He's really, really good. And I just had no clue. There's a few others, I told myself going into pandemic summer, I was going to sit down with all of Philip Carr's Bernie Gunther novels also, again, in the genre sort of stuff. He died a few years ago and, therefore no chance of getting him on the show. But yeah, it's weird. I mean, I come down here the library is also my office. So I'm down here all day doing work, and I'm surrounded by 2,000 or 3,000 books and graphic novels and everything else. And it's just, yeah, I've got the things I need to read. And then there's the people I just jump on anyway.
No, that's wonderful. And you were mentioning cartoonists. I'll be giving, so I read for work, I read for teaching, but Alison Bechdel's Fun Home, I'm bringing that to the students. And I know nothing about what you know about cartoonists. Oh, I think I'm talking over you. I'm sorry.
No, it's okay. I was just going to say it's storytelling.
It is.
Comics. You might not get all the technical things that the artists that the cartoonist is doing. There are ways that they sequence panels and sort of use lights and darks sometimes if they're really thoughtful about it in ways that are intuitive for the reader, but you're not going to get. That's cool. But, being able to, that's in particular is a great book to get people who aren't necessarily comics oriented, reading. So it's a very literary comic in that respect.
Oh, it is. And actually Peter Trachtenberg, whom you mentioned, he and I were emailing, and I told him I was going to do this, and he was like, yeah, it's a great one for students to see, really, again, the double perspective. So the narrator at the top being different from the character in the panel. And it just blew me away. I guess I didn't even get into memoirs, like I said, until I was pretty much writing one, but that's a magical book. So I'll be reading up on some of the techniques you're talking about, but mostly I'll just be approaching it as literary.
Yeah. I have a textbook now to foist off on people for this stuff. It is so incredibly weird sounding, but is the greatest teacher in the world for just how comics work.
Ooh.
What a reader does with them. And it's all based on a 3-panel strip of Nancy from the 1950s.
Nancy!
These two guys.
Oh my God.
Oh God. These two guys, and I had them on the show, Paul Karasick and Mark Newgarden, they take this one daily strip and they run 44 or so spreads of the book are devoted to a different aspect of just those 3 panels or those few panels. They'll white out everything but, the certain blacks that are left in there in the inks. They will, just focus on different things. And everyone's got an essay underneath it about what Ernie Bushmiller was doing. And this is all just a thrown off daily strip that teaches you everything about how comics work, how they can work, and what they do for the reader. And again, it's as Art Spiegelman said, it's tougher not to read Nancy than to read Nancy when you see it in a comic strip, because it's so ridiculously smooth and easy. The Ernie Bushmiller ones from when he was alive.
Yes.
It's a really fascinating thing. And these guys worked on it for like 20 plus years. They had an essay about this like in the 80s or 90s and expanded it into a book.
Cool.
How to Read Nancy is what it's called.
Oh,
So,
nice. I'll definitely get that. That's a great tip. That sounds like a good book.
Yeah.
I don't think David has that here.
No, that's a weird one. And it only came out about 2 years ago. It's a weird one to glom onto, but you will learn things that seem really basic or intuitive. You realize somebody thought out all of those things, and this is how it works on a certain level. So anyway, that's just me prattling on at length. You mentioned working, because I love, and I think David was the first person to curse me out for doing this. What are you working on next? You mentioned working on experimenting with fiction.
Yeah, I want it to be a novel, Gil. I don't really understand the form of short stories, though I read short stories, but I'm ambitious enough. I had almost 60 pages at one point. But I was going to say this to you, some of it I know will remain, in this work of fiction, whatever it's going to be. And then some of it, so since I started it maybe a year and a half ago, some of it's obviously fake. It'll go out, I can't wait to just cut the fake page, so the fake fiction where I think I'm far enough along to be able to distinguish. So that helps, and I think it'll consume me for a while. I need to really just keep reading. And then I need to make sure I don't read the news in the morning as the first thing I do.
Yeah.
So you asked about the pandemic and how things have changed. Always with prose, my writing, it is happening in the morning. And, I and many other writers I know, we felt just paralyzed. That's a word you used earlier. And
it's a word I use often, as a matter of fact.
Anyway, I mean, there was a group yesterday of writers that are organizing. I mean, we all know that we need to have Biden and Harris in, and I think that will take some of my time. But yeah, I think giving myself the freedom not to read the news first thing, it's just, hey, it's a buzzkill. It's kind of impossible. It's impossible for me to do creative work if I do that first. I don't know if that makes me an irresponsible citizen or what, but
no, it's one of those things. Even one of my big time lobbyist guys down in Washington, I asked him about being on Twitter, and he said to me, Gil, I don't need to know before everybody else. I'll find out. It's okay. It'll get to you eventually. Let it go and try and take care of your own thing for a little bit.
I think that sounds really smart. David confessed to me yesterday that he had read something on CNN. I was like, what that trash? What are you doing? And he said, well, I think that they report first. And for some reason, I read The Guardian first because they seem like they sometimes irresponsibly report things before the Post, or maybe it's the U.S. edition.
But again, think of it, but take it, in terms of how it affects your life. Is there anything that you would benefit from finding out like an hour later than everybody else?
No.
Yeah, we get on that treadmill of having to find everything out right away. It doesn't mean anything. You can't impact it. You want to know if your friends and loved ones are in danger. That's pretty much it. As far as I'm concerned, you don't need to be tuned into the very moment, because you don't need to have this giant feed of like all the world, and all these various forms of media telling you exactly what's happening in the current moment. As again, I think the book shows, there's so much is gained, your book, I mean, so much is gained through reflection and trying to understand the meaning of something, not the immediate thing that happened.
That's right. And it is the friends and loved ones, checking email, that makes sense to me to do, as just part of a family, part of being a human. No one needs to know. And these stories are crafted before, the news stories, before they're coming out anyway. I completely agree with that philosophy of you don't need to know immediately.
So you need to put it into practice next and spend more time writing.
Yeah.
Because, I want to have more conversations with you, figuring we can tie things into the podcast because otherwise I don't exist. So. Oh,
your work. So you're still doing the full-time job, but doing it on Zoom or is it?
I don't, the lobbying is, part of it, but a huge chunk of this stuff is, like I spent last week reviewing a big document that a number of different industry groups were going to submit to FDA and trying to figure out, what they might not be getting about the particular guys I represent and how to work the language to, that's the funny thing is that I'm always the guy in any of these scenarios who's making editorial suggestions that make everything work better. But that's when they have to go back and, Gil used to run a magazine. This is always they all have this regulatory experience or legislative stuff, but it comes down to the, he made that sentence work better and, came up with a better title for X, Y, and Z. So a chunk of this stuff is just reading, organizing, writing to members about stuff. And other times, I have to get on conference calls and WebExes and things like that. But,
it's impressive finding a way to survive and to support your art. It's difficult. Anyway, that's pretty fascinating.
The guys I represent by day are the ones who are going to end up manufacturing the vaccines and therapeutics for the drug companies and everything else. So, we'll talk about it once we get off in a minute. But that's what I do for a living is not going to be endangered by the pandemic. If anything, the guys I represent actually have more importance now, and everybody wants to understand this weird system that I work inside.
Well, thank you. I mean, that's all we are waiting for.
Yeah. Well, I won't tell you then what the president did this morning. So on the strength of that, but thanks for coming on. I enjoy the hell out of the book. And, despite the fact that it's incredibly dark material for you, I don't know how easy it is for you to keep revisiting it to talk to people about it now that it's out, but thank you for doing it here.
Thank you for having me. It was joyful for me. I was nervous beforehand, like I said, but you're a professional. Thank you, Gil.
Thanks so much. And that was Betsy Bonner. Go read The Book of Atlantis Black from Tin House. It is compelling, beautifully written, and takes you to the limits of what we can know about the people we love the most. As we talked about, Betsy's not much for social media. The book has an Instagram feed at The Book of Atlantis Black, all one word, all spelled exactly how you would think. And when you go there, there's a link tree in the bio, and that has links to some other pages about the book and Atlantis's music, which they're re-releasing. Now, in the before time, this is when I would tell you about my Patreon and PayPal and how to support the podcast and blah, blah, blah. But as I've said in recent months, basically since the pandemic hit, I don't want your financial support. I'm doing just fine. My job is taking care of me pretty well. If you do want to support the show, you can do that by sending me a letter, postcard, email. Tell me what you think and who you'd like me to record with. And if you do have money to spare, then please go find the artists, writers, or non-artists and non-writers, just people in need. They've got Patreons, they've got GoFundMes, Kickstarters, Indiegogos, whatever it is. Help them. And if you don't feel comfortable helping individuals, well, there are plenty of food banks, freedom funds. We're seeing a lot of protests right now in Wisconsin that are going to lead to unfair arrests and people who are in need of legal assistance. So what I'm saying is, if you're in a position to help people right now, please find a way to help them. And the one thing I did mention at the top of the episode, I do have a zine that I publish. The first issue came out about 3 months ago. It is called Haiku for Business Travelers. Like I say, it's free. If you want one, just drop me a line or visit haikuforbusinesstravelers.com and you can hit me up that way. You can kick in a few bucks for postage and production if you want, but this isn't about making money. This is about me sharing my art, such as it is. Our music for this episode is Fella by Hal Mayforth, used with permission from the artist. You should visit my archives to check out my episode with Hal from the summer of 2018 and learn more about his art and painting. And you can listen to his music at soundcloud.com/Mayforth. And that's MAY4TH. And that's it for this week's episode of the Virtual Memories Show. Thanks so much for listening. We'll be back next week with another great conversation. You can subscribe to the Virtual Memories Show and download past episodes at the iTunes Store. You can also find all our episodes and get on our email list at either of our websites, vmspod.com or chimeraobscura.com/VM. You can also follow the Virtual Memories Show on Twitter and Instagram at VMSPod, at virtualmemoriespodcast.tumblr.com, and on YouTube, Spotify, and TuneIn.com by searching for Virtual Memories Show. And if you like this podcast, please tell your pals, talk it up on social media, and go to iTunes, look up the Virtual Memories Show, and leave a rating and maybe a review for us. It all goes to helping us build a bigger audience. You've been listening to the Virtual Memories Show. I'm your host, Gil Roth. Keep reading, keep making art, and keep the conversation going.